Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about touchy subjects. I like that. This is actually me answering a question from Shearsner, who asks, Hey Tim, I would like to know, how do you handle touchy subjects in your games? Religion, politics, violence, etc. How do you know if you're pushing too hard or going too far on those things? Or even, should we bother about not going to those places at all? Do limits always come from marketing? Lol. And what's your stance on that? Okay, these are good questions. It's a lot of questions. I'm going to answer, but also you need to understand this is my answer on this. It's kind of a personal thing because everybody will have a different take on this. I think what you've asked is, here's a huge continuum of things that could appear in games, and everybody has a different opinion on where the line is that you will cross. Some people think it's way at the end. Some people think it's way at the beginning. Some people don't view it as a one-dimensional continuum. It's multi-dimensional. One of them is religion, another is politics, another is violence, another is social issues. And they're not wrong. I'm just going to say it's a continuum. You can decide how many dimensions this continuum has. And once you acknowledge that no two people are going to agree on this, that's the thing I'm going to dive into. Because you can always just not put subjects like these in your game at all. Because if once you do, people also can, exercise their right to not like them and then not buy your game. So there's always that risk. And sometimes, though, if you don't put anything in, your game just feels a little bland, like non-edgy, and that's fine. But sometimes people want a game that makes them think. It pushes the envelope a little. It pushes against the edges. And yes, I do think you can go too far, but of course, where my too far is, maybe not as far enough for you, or maybe way too far. I think the fear of that, the fear of going too far, makes most people, most game developers, not go far enough, or even at all. So yes, there are some game developers that I think just restrict themselves to, I don't want to say children's games, but games that are absolutely non-edgy in any way. Here's a platformer where you're playing a tubby hippopotamus that's trying to pick up pineapples. We're done. Obviously, that is not how I've done it in my games. And usually the team of people I work with, there are people who want to push things. And that always causes a discussion within the team and sometimes outside the team. But let me give you a couple examples. So in Fallout, we included children because that seemed to be the realistic thing to do. That there would be settlements and there would be children in those settlements. It kind of showed, too, when you were leaving the vault, that there was some kind of recovery going on in the wasteland. Now, we knew people would try to kill them because people in QA were trying to kill them and people on the team were trying to kill them. So we made it really bad, like really bad to kill them. There were reputations, there were reactions from NPCs, there were even, things that would get slapped on you, like you're now the child killer and you have bounty on your head and all this stuff. I thought that was really bad, and it demonstrated that there are huge negatives to behaving that way. That wasn't enough for some people. That led Fallout to either having no children or invulnerable children, and I think all that just leads to more problems. It's weird to play a post-apocalyptic wasteland where people are talking about trying to recover, but there's absolutely no signs of it. It's also weird to have invulnerable NPCs in the game. I've said I don't like essential NPCs. I don't like making children essential. It just causes issues, not just in the mindset of when you play the game, but also strategically, tactically within combat. Now there are things running around that may or may not be able to shoot you, but you definitely can't hurt them. It just causes a bunch of issues. It's going to make your AI that much more complicated. Look at Arcanum too. We wanted to address a lot of social things in Arcanum. We wanted to address racism. We wanted to address classism. We wanted to address wealth inequality. And this is all back in the late 90s. So what we did, and we knew that would cause problem even back then, so we bundled it all up into this mythical fantasy world where it was all acted out on things that didn't feel so directed at modern day society. There were people who think that went too far then. There seem to be a lot more people now, though, who think it went too far. And I just remember thinking back then and now, how do you address these things? How do you address societal issues without showing them, without showing the bad things that it leads to, without demonstrating those problems and then giving the player an opportunity to try to fix them? Sure, if you're going to make a game that has a lot of player agency, there are some players that are going to double down on these things and go, yeah, wizards shouldn't be allowed on the train, or they have to sit in the back. Okay, but I think it was good that Arcanum at least tried to show these things cast in a new light that made some people go, hey, that's not fair. Ooh, that really isn't fair. So I liked that. Now, as I've said before, I think a lot of people, game players, game developers, publishers, are far more cautious these days about doing things like that. And that's not really my style, which may be a good reason for me to retire. It's like, hey, people don't want to see these things anymore. They want fantasy worlds or sci-fi worlds where all these problems either don't exist or they've been solved. Okay, I still think these areas should be explored. It's what art does, and games are art. In fact, I should probably do another video about games being art. I did one. I should probably do more. There's just a lot more to say. But I think games are art. Art explores things like this, so it should be done. Now, one of the things Scheisner, I hope I'm saying that, Scheisner asked, I hope I'm saying your name right. I'm terrible with names. That has been established. One of the things they asked was, does this come from marketing? And I'm like, yes, marketing often sets limits. They say, hey, look, you're going to cut out a whole demographic if you go too far in this direction. Sales often gives limits too, and I'll talk about that in a second. But keep in mind, marketing and sales are different. Marketing is all about how we're going to advertise this, what kind of PR we're going to do. Sales is about getting it into stores, getting it distributed all over the world. And how are you going to distribute it? You're going to do digitally, physically, stuff like that. And also keep in mind, sometimes publishers, if they're giving you the money, and I've said this before, the answer to a lot of people's questions is money. Publishers will often have limits that they impose on you. If they're nice publishers, if they're thoughtful publishers, they will do it at the beginning. They will tell you this when they sit down, going, hey, we love your games. We want a game like one of your last games. However, can you leave the drugs out? I'm fine with that if they say it up front. What annoys me to no end is to wait until the final part of game development, when you've made a lot of content, you've made a bunch of things that are dependent on that content, and then they go, yeah, we love all this, but can you take out the drugs? I'm like, you mean the drugs that include all the healing stuff? You mean the healing stuff that the entire combat thing is balanced against? You mean that? So there's a way to do it, publishers, and it's not to wait until the last minute and then go, oh, by the way, we forgot to mention, here's a bunch of things we don't like. Now, I brought up sales and marketing being different. One thing that comes from sales a lot is you have to understand that different regions of the world impose different limitations on what you're allowed to do. There's different limitations on violence. We love violence in the US. Boom, boom, boom. People dying, people dying. They don't like that as much in other countries. So you often have to restrict that. The restrictions can be different. In some places, you can't show blood. In some, you can't have blood at all. So you can shoot someone and they fall over, but there can be no liquid. In others, you can have the liquid, but it can't be red, which amuses me as a colorblind person. I'm like, I'll make it green, I'll make it purple, I'll do whatever you want. But you can't have red blood. Some places you can't show bone. In some of them, you can't show bone at all. But the one I remember was one region of the world, you can't show bone if you're also showing meat on the bone. Which means you can have a skeleton attack you, but you can't have a zombie that's partially decomposed and their bones are poking out of their flesh. Zombie bad, skeleton good. I don't claim to understand these. It just becomes a checklist that you have to understand. Now, what's funny is the U.S. loves violence. Oh, but not nudity, or at least some kinds of nudity. It's like, oh no, It's okay to show someone get their head blown off, but you showed a boobie. Meanwhile, other parts of the world are like, show all the boobs you want, but don't show someone getting, blown apart. So you just have to understand this. And sales, if they're on top of what they're doing, they will have these things available for you. So you can go, okay, where are we distributing this? And what do I need to know before I finish up the design of this game and hand it off to programmers and artists that are going to do a lot of work? Tell me now. Do not tell me 2 months before we ship. Also, tell me, do you want me to not have it at all, or do you just want me to have a setting for it? And if there's a setting, is it something that's available to the consumer, or is it something that we will do internally and make builds for different things? It's a question of like, does it appear in the options screen to turn down violence, or do you literally turn off the violence for anything that you ship to a particular region of the world, and none of those animations even appear in the game data? So those are things that you have to know earlier. Now, as I said earlier, it's a lot easier for you just to make a game that avoids all that. But keep in mind, we're talking about a lot of things that you're now going to have to avoid. You're going to not have any violence, not even in some places cartoon violence. You're not going to have any nudity. You're not going to have any drug use. What does drug use mean? Sometimes it's a potion. Sometimes drug use means cigarettes. Sometimes it doesn't. So you probably can't have anything like that. You can't show blood. You can't show bones. It really will limit what kind of... You really can probably only make a very cartoony kind of game. Or a puzzle game that has no violence in it whatsoever. But, like I implied earlier, making games, sometimes it is about doing the easy thing. Sometimes you want to make a statement. And by the way, for people going, yeah, modern games have always made statements. Games in the 80s and 90s made statements. They made political statements. They made societal statements. You may not notice, but they did. So this has always been true. So the big question for a game developer and whoever's giving them the money is to decide, what statements do you want to make? What statements are you going to withhold making? And then make your game based on that. I've been very lucky to have made several games with very little publisher oversight. Fallout, Arcanum. There are other games I've made where some things have been said to me at the beginning, and I was fine with it. But that made people go, that's not exactly the Tim Kaine game we were expecting. You're correct. I withheld some of my statements because that's not what the game was about. And then some games, the game wasn't about that at all. It wasn't somebody told me not to do it. This is not what it's gonna be about. And then other games I've made, I'm looking at you, South Park. That game made statements that in a billion years I would never have thought, you know what I want to do in my game? This. And they did things that I didn't even think we could do. They did things that I thought, this is not going to result in a sellable product. But for some reason, South Park can do it. So that was interesting for me to be making a game where even occasionally I went, is this too far? Not my decision. Code. So that is the width and breadth of Touchy Subjects. And Shearsner, that was a good question.